My bacterial pathogen is Vibrio cholerae. Vibrio cholerae belongs to the bacteria domain and started from Indian trade in the 19th century. Vibrio cholerae is a powerful, self-replicating bacterium that was found due to people becoming ill after drinking from their water sources. This can affect humans and animals. However, it is less likely that an animal shows symptoms. The symptoms of this can be extreme and even cause death. Thankfully, there are now treatments such as antibiotics and rehydration therapy to combat the bacterial pathogen. The genus of this bacteria is Vibrio, and the specific epithet is cholerae, giving the bacterium the species name of Vibrio cholerae, or V. cholerae. Vibrio cholerae belongs to the bacteria domain, the Eubacteria kingdom, and the Enterobacteriaceae family. This bacterium is a gram-negative single cell that measures 0.3 micron in diameter and 1.3 micron in length, and can be curved or straight rods. The Vibrio cholerae cell has an inner cytoplasmic membrane that has a thin peptidoglycan cell wall. The outer membrane contains lipopolysaccharides, or LPS, which is a lipid or sugar molecule that is extremely heat stable. LPS contains O antigens and lipid A endotoxins. The cell also has an upper outer membrane where there are porin proteins. The cell has a glycocalyx capsule made up of polysaccharides that help the bacteria attach to the intestinal villi of the host. The capsule gives this bacteria a virulence factor that cloaks the bacterial cell from the host immune cells. Sex pili is used to transfer DNA and attach to intestinal cells to colonize. It also contains a singular polar flagellum and is a non-spore forming bacterium. Vibrio cholerae is transmitted by fecal-oral contamination that a human or an animal can ingest through food. It can also be found on utensils, but most commonly it is found in water. The Vibrio cholerae bacterium is ingested through the mouth from feces in the water. It travels down the esophagus to the stomach, and from there it travels to the small intestine, where it secretes the cholera toxin. LPS lipid A triggers an inflammatory response, which can cause fever, shock, and even death. The cholera toxin causes diarrhea from electrolyte imbalances due to the altered sodium pump and causes an excess amount of sodium in the stool. So here we have a picture depicting how toxins enter the cell and what they do. So this black line right here represents the lipid A, which we already stated is in the outer membrane, and this holds on to the bacterial cell. The red and yellow inside represents the factories that manufacture proteins and release the second toxin. The toxin exits the bacterial cell, and because of that, it's considered an exotoxin. The enterotoxin has to do with where it goes and has two subunits A and B. And this attaches to your epithelial cells in your gut. And it's represented by the green and purple. The B subunit, which is the purple right here, binds to the epithelial cell so that the endothelial cell will bring the entire toxin, both A and B subunits, into the cell by receptor-mediated endocytosis, which is right here. Once inside, the green part, which is subunit A, is the active part. So right here. When the A subunit is in the endothelial cell, it has two jobs. Number one, chloride ions are pumped out of the endothelial cell, and with that, water and sodium follows. Because if you remember correctly from chemistry, opposite charges attract. So right here, you have the chloride ions going out, sodium and H2O going out, both leaving the epithelial cell. So because of that, all water rushes out of your cells into the intestines, where it then gets excreted in the form of diarrhea. Job number two It triggers the death of the epithelial cell, which causes your cells to fall apart and the cells to die. With that, as cells die, they get excreted in the form of rice stools, along with white blood cells. In addition to epithelial cells and white blood cells, the Vibrio cholerae bacterium is also excreted and then can be spread further. The incubation period for Vibrio cholerae can be 2 hours to 5 days after infection, and some patients can be infected for 7 to 14 days without any symptoms. Vibrio cholerae's infection is at high risk for fever, shock, abdominal pain, vomiting, and electrolyte imbalances due to water and electrolytes leaving the intestinal cells through diarrhea. Patients with Vibrio cholerae have rice stools, which you can see here off to the side. And I know you probably can't see on the screen, but there are little rice-looking things inside, and those are your cells, the dead cells. And they can lose up to 3 to 5 gallons a day. Along with the cholera bacterium, you can also get a diarrheal illness caused by the bacterium entering the small intestine. The symptoms of this are very, very similar, with the addition of tachycardia, loss of skin elasticity, dry mucous membranes, muscle and abdominal cramps, dehydration, and irritability. So now for a bit of history on where cholera was discovered and where it can be found. I found this story very interesting. I learned it in epidemiology with Miss Eden, and I highly recommend taking that class. Back in 1854, John Snow was the first to discover cholera in London. People were dying very quickly and there were no diagnoses. He then took matters into his own hands and decided to go door to door asking people where they get their water from. Many people shut him down or they simply just didn't know. He then asked the landlords, and they still were unsure of where they got their water from. He then was forced to go to the office of the Registrar General and got the records for the pipelines to see which water resource was associated with each building. He then drew a map and marked down where people were dying and where they got their water from, and he ended up finding a pattern. People still did not believe him. If you watch Game of Thrones, you'll know this saying, and this is where it comes from. They said, "Jon Snow, you know nothing." After that, a minister named Henry Whitehead, who sat down with many of the people who had passed away, was also looking into the cholera outbreak. He was placed on a committee with Jon Snow, and they both went door to door asking people questions. Since Henry had already developed a sense of trust with the people, they were able to fill in some of the missing gaps, and now they have both gone down in history and saved many lives. From then, we found out that cholera is commonly found in locations with inadequate hygiene and poor water resources like rivers and coastal waters. This global pandemic has caused 3 to 5 million cases and 100,000 to 200,000 deaths, and puts 1.4 billion people at risk worldwide. Within the past decade, around 9 countries have reported cholera cases. In Africa, all in 2020, Benin had 196 cases with 5 deaths. Ethiopia had 14,728 cases with 257 deaths. Kenya had 711 cases with 13 deaths. Nigeria had 1,115 cases with 61 deaths. Uganda had 1,488 cases. And Somalia had 5,485 cases with 30 deaths. In Asia in 2020, Yemen had 167,278 cases with 48 deaths. So as you can see, cholera is still a battle for many countries, but thankfully there are antibiotics to combat the powerful pathogen now. Vibrio cholerae can be diagnosed through stool cultures. However, the use of dipsticks that can detect the cholera toxin and rapid diagnostic tests are more inexpensive and can still keep track of the bacterium. Oral antibiotics are given if the patient is not vomiting and is used to decrease symptoms. And they can reduce the amount of diarrhea excreted from the system. This also helps reduce the amount of fluids that the patient needs. These antibiotics include tetracyclines and macrolides. Tetracyclines are the most studied and can stop the growth of bacteria. They can also reduce the excretion of the bacteria by 3 days. Macrolides bind to the subunit of ribosomes in bacteria and inhibit their growth. Rehydration therapy can also be prescribed to those who have lost a significant amount of fluid within 6 hours and about 350 milliliters within the first 24 hours of infection. It helps replace the fluid and electrolytes lost during the diarrhea. Doctors will then assess how much fluid the patient has lost and adjust the dosage from there. The fluids that they use are isotonic oral fluids, which are a mixture of salt and sugar and water, and require the patient to drink very large quantities. If the patient is vomiting, the doctor can then order intravenous infusion or IV therapy. One option for drugs is to target the ribosome that uses mRNA to assemble amino acids into the polypeptide, soon to be protein. This inhibits mRNA translation. Azithromycin is a type of macrolide used to combat cholera, and it targets the 50S portion of the ribosome, which inhibits protein synthesis. Tetracyclines block the transfer RNA to the ribosome. Block the transfer RNA that brings the amino acids to the ribosome to start the building process. Both of these drugs are bacteriostatic, meaning they prevent cell growth. Vibrio cholerae is a part of bacterioplankton in aquatic environments. As we know, fish and birds feed on plankton. They could then harbor the bacterium and spread it across very long distances. Some strains even become more virulent when they spend more time with zooplankton. Vibrio cholerae has affected many countries and disrupted their economic structure. The average cost of a patient in the US having cholera is about $65.60 and $59.70 in 2016 for the patient's households and the hospitals that treated them. According to the World Health Organization, Peru spent $770 million in 1991 during the cholera outbreak. The African region lost $176 million in 2007 with a total of 110,837 cases. Vibrio cholerae, however, is economically efficient to treat for most countries and easily avoidable. To prevent the spread of Vibrio cholerae, you should drink and use clean, safe water, keep adequate hygiene by washing your hands with soap and water, clean your house, and also make sure that you use toilets. And if there isn't one, then you can then bury your feces. Never defecate in any body of water. And finally, when cooking, make sure that your food is cooked thoroughly and all fruits and vegetables are peeled. And here are my references. If you guys have any questions at all, do not hesitate to comment down below. You can also email me or Miss Eden. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you guys have. Thank you so much for listening and have a great day.